Welcome to a story that might leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about history, politics, and human resilience. Imagine being at the epicenter of a seismic event, a world-shattering moment that promises to reshape everything in its wake. This isn't a tale from the headlines. It's an exploration into a region that once promised a future of hope and transformation but now finds itself grappling with disillusionment, economic ruin, and a haunting sense of lost dreams. In John Pfeffer's Aftershock, a journey into Eastern Europe's broken dreams, we venture into the heart of Eastern Europe, a place where the aftershocks of history continue to reverberate, shaping the lives of millions who lived through the collapse of communism and the promises of a new world order. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 heralded the dawn of a new era, one filled with optimism for freedom, democracy, and prosperity. But for many, that new dawn quickly dimmed, replaced by an unsettling reality where those dreams of a brighter future were shattered by the harsh realities of a globalized, capitalist world. What went wrong? How did a region that once stood on the precipice of hope and change end up in the clutches of corruption, inequality, and disenchantment? Feffer takes us on a journey across several countries, through bustling capitals and forgotten villages, revealing how the promises of the post-Cold War era have crumbled under the weight of economic turmoil, political upheaval, and a deep sense of betrayal. This is not just a book about Eastern Europe. It is a profound examination of the human cost of change, the wreckage of broken promises, and the haunting question of whether the dreams of the past can ever be revived. But what makes this book truly captivating is its ability to draw you into the lives of ordinary people, those who lived through the revolution and those who are left in its wake. Their stories of hope, despair, and resilience breathe life into Pfeffer's analysis, allowing us to connect with the region not through abstract politics or historical events, but through the personal struggles and triumphs of its people. From the streets of Prague to the countryside of Bulgaria, we meet individuals whose lives have been forever shaped by the seismic shifts that followed the end of communism. Each story is a testament to the enduring human spirit, but also a sobering reminder of the cost of broken promises. Pfeffer's narrative is as much about the present as it is about the past. He explores how the scars of history continue to haunt the region, shaping everything from political ideologies to personal identities. The legacy of the Soviet era, the rise of nationalism, the lure of Western capitalism, these forces continue to exert their influence, often in ways that seem to be a betrayal of the very ideals that inspired the revolutions of 1989. For many in Eastern Europe, the aftershocks of the past are not just historical footnotes. They are living realities that shape their daily lives, their hopes for the future, and their understanding of who they are. But Aftershock isn't just a book of melancholy and despair. It is also a journey of discovery, a search for meaning in a world that seems increasingly fragmented and uncertain. Pfeffer does not simply lay bare the problems of Eastern Europe. He also offers insights into the resilience of its people, the ways they have adapted and survived in a world that has often let them down. There is a deep sense of humanity in Pfeffer's writing, a recognition that while the region may be broken, it is not beyond repair. There is hope, but it is a hope tempered by the hard lessons of the past and the challenges of the present. So, if you've ever wondered about the true cost of historical upheavals, if you've ever pondered the lives of those who lived through the fall of empires and the rise of new world orders, Aftershock offers a powerful, eye-opening account. It asks us to reflect on the ways in which dreams can be built and broken, and how the echoes of the past continue to shape the world we live in today. It's a story of dreams deferred, of lives interrupted, but also of resilience, hope, and the search for something better, no matter how elusive that future may seem. Prepare to be transported to a world you may not fully understand, but will certainly never forget. Pfeffer's journey through the broken dreams of Eastern Europe is an invitation to witness the complexities of a region in flux, and to come to terms with the fact that, sometimes, The aftershocks of history shape us in ways we could never have predicted. Introduction: The shifting landscape of Eastern Europe. John Feffer's Aftershock, a journey into Eastern Europe's broken dreams, sets the tone with a striking introduction that blends personal reflections with political commentary. Feffer begins by revisiting his own experiences in Eastern Europe during the fall of the Berlin Wall and the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Like many Western observers at the time, Feffer had a hopeful view of the future for countries transitioning from authoritarianism to democracy. However, the optimism he felt then has since given way to disappointment as the realities of these transitions unfolded. Feffer highlights the stark contrasts between the hopes that accompanied the fall of the Soviet Union and the disillusionment that followed, particularly in countries once under communist control. His journey through Eastern Europe, across former Soviet republics and Eastern Bloc countries, reveals that the promises of democracy and prosperity have largely been unmet for many of the region's people. Feffer's perspective is informed by his time as an outsider witnessing the collapse of communism and the struggles that followed. The introduction sets up the central question of the book: why have the dreams of Eastern Europe turned to ashes? With a tone that balances empathy and critical insight, Feffer embarks on a journey to answer this question, tracing the political, economic, and social aftershocks of these transitions. Chapter 1: The Ghosts of the Soviet Union. The opening chapter delves into the lingering shadows of the Soviet era. Feffer takes readers through Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, examining how the collapse of the Soviet Union continues to haunt the region. For many in these countries, the end of the Soviet system did not result in the hoped-for prosperity or freedom. Instead, it ushered in chaos, economic collapse, and an uncertain future. In Russia, Feffer reflects on the rise of Vladimir Putin, who capitalized on the yearning for stability in the wake of the chaotic 1990s. Putin's image as a strongman who restored order is contrasted with the stark realities faced by ordinary Russians who have seen little improvement in their lives since the end of communism. In Ukraine, Feffer explores the profound identity crisis that emerged after independence, as the country tried to navigate its place between the West and Russia. Ukraine's path has been marked by political instability, corruption, and a deep divide between its pro-European West and its pro-Russian East. Feffer connects the current conflict in Ukraine to these long-standing fractures, illustrating how the legacy of the Soviet Union remains a central point of contention. Belarus, often referred to as Europe's last dictatorship, serves as a poignant example of the failure to embrace democratic reforms. Feffer notes that while Belarus has experienced some economic growth under President Alexander Lukashenko, the country remains politically stifled, with few freedoms and rampant corruption. Feffer's journey through these countries is a powerful commentary on how the post-Soviet dream of a new, democratic Eastern Europe has not fully materialized. Instead, many countries have been trapped in a cycle of authoritarianism, corruption, and economic stagnation, with the ghosts of the Soviet past still haunting their political and social landscapes. Chapter 2: The False Dawn of Democracy. As Feffer continues his journey, he turns his attention to the countries of Eastern Europe that were part of the Soviet sphere of influence, but never fully absorbed into the Soviet Union itself, such as Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic. These nations experienced the collapse of communism in a way that initially seemed to promise a brighter future. Feffer examines why, despite initial optimism, these countries too have seen a resurgence of populism, nationalism, and disillusionment. Feffer examines Poland, where the rise of the Solidarity movement and the peaceful transition from communist rule to democracy had been seen as a model for other countries. Yet today, Poland has found itself deeply divided, with the ruling Law and Justice Party stoking nationalist sentiment and undermining democratic institutions. Feffer paints a picture of a nation caught between the ghosts of its communist past and the new challenges of democratic consolidation. In Hungary, Feffer focuses on the figure of Viktor Orbán, whose government has taken an increasingly authoritarian turn. Orban's government has systematically weakened the independence of the judiciary, attacked civil society, and undermined free media. Feffer contrasts Hungary's initial post-communist years, marked by democratic optimism, with the current erosion of democratic norms under Orban's leadership. The Czech Republic, which had been seen as one of the success stories of post-communist Europe, is also not immune to the backlash against democracy. Feffer explores the rise of populist movements in the country and the growing disillusionment with the political establishment. This chapter paints a sobering picture of how, in many cases, the initial promise of democracy has given way to a sense of betrayal and fear. The false dawn of democracy, Feffer argues, is marked by unfulfilled promises. The hope that Eastern Europe would quickly transition to thriving democracies has been dashed by political corruption, economic inequality, and the rise of populism. Feffer's journey across these countries reveals the complex and often painful reality of democratic transitions in a region that continues to struggle with its past. Chapter 3: The Economic Collapse. In this chapter, Feffer dives into the economic challenges that have plagued Eastern Europe since the fall of communism. He examines how many of the region's countries, once tightly controlled by state-run economies, faced severe economic dislocation during the transition to capitalism. Feffer speaks to ordinary citizens in countries like Bulgaria, Romania, and Slovakia, where privatization and the sudden introduction of free market policies created widespread hardship. While a few oligarchs amassed great wealth, the majority of people faced unemployment, inflation, and poverty. The rush to embrace neoliberal economic policies resulted in a shock to the system, with many people left behind in the process. In Bulgaria and Romania, the transition to a market economy was particularly difficult, with the collapse of state-owned industries and the rise of corruption. Feffer examines how, in many cases, the economic elite that emerged after communism was composed of former communist officials and members of the nomenklatura who had used their connections to amass power and wealth. Feffer also looks at the role of international organizations, such as the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank, in shaping Eastern Europe's economic landscape. These institutions provided loans and aid to help stabilize the region's economies, but also imposed structural adjustment programs that prioritized economic liberalization over social welfare, exacerbating inequality and poverty. Through interviews and observations, Feffer provides a vivid picture of the human cost of economic reform. He contrasts the grand narratives of success and progress that Western leaders touted with the realities on the ground, where many people felt they had been sold out by the very institutions that promised them prosperity. Chapter 4: The Rise of Nationalism. Nationalism emerges as one of the most troubling consequences of Eastern Europe's transition in this chapter. Feffer explores how the collapse of the Soviet Union and the breakup of Yugoslavia gave rise to national identities that were often manipulated by political leaders seeking to consolidate power. Feffer examines the case of Serbia, where the legacy of ethnic conflict and the rise of nationalist rhetoric under Slobodan Milosevic left deep scars on the region. The Yugoslav Wars and the brutal ethnic cleansing campaigns that accompanied them have left an indelible mark on the political and social landscape of Eastern Europe. Feffer connects the rise of nationalism in the 1990s to the resurgence of nationalist movements in the present day, particularly in countries like Hungary and Poland. Feffer argues that nationalism is often a response to the failure of the post-communist transition. In many cases, when the promises of prosperity and democracy fail to materialize, people turn to nationalism as a way to reclaim a sense of identity and pride. This chapter delves into the ways in which nationalist leaders in countries like Poland, Hungary, and the Balkans have exploited people's frustrations to gain political power, often at the expense of democratic values and human rights. Chapter 5: The Legacy of War and Trauma. Feffer takes a more introspective turn in this chapter, exploring the enduring legacy of war and trauma in Eastern Europe. He examines the effects of the Yugoslav Wars, the Soviet occupation of the Baltic states, and other violent conflicts on the psyche of the region. Feffer interviews survivors of these conflicts, including refugees and displaced people, and reflects on how war continues to shape the politics of the region. He writes poignantly about the psychological scars left by violence and how they contribute to ongoing divisions and mistrust. This chapter underscores the difficulty of building a unified, peaceful future when the wounds of the past remain open and festering. Chapter 6: A New Cold War? Feffer explores the growing tensions between Russia and the West in this chapter. He examines the ways in which Eastern Europe has once again become a battleground for influence between Russia and NATO, with countries like Ukraine, Georgia, and the Baltic states caught in the middle. Feffer discusses the role of military alliances, propaganda, and disinformation in exacerbating tensions, drawing parallels between the Cold War and the current geopolitical situation. He reflects on the tragic irony that, after decades of working to escape Russian domination, Eastern Europe is once again at the center of a struggle for power and influence. Chapter 7: The European Union's Promise and Perils. In this chapter, Feffer turns his focus to the European Union, EU, and its role in shaping the future of Eastern Europe. After the fall of the Soviet Union, many countries in Eastern Europe looked to the EU as a beacon of prosperity and stability. For these countries, EU membership represented not just economic benefits, but also the promise of integration into the Western political sphere, the rule of law, and a community of democratic nations. Feffer examines how countries like Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic went through lengthy and difficult processes of EU integration. While the EU's promise of economic growth and political stability seemed alluring, the reality has been much more complicated. In many cases, the EU's policies have exacerbated the economic inequalities within Eastern Europe. For instance, Feffer highlights the ways in which countries like Romania and Bulgaria have struggled with corruption and weak governance despite EU membership. The EU's demands for reforms often proved difficult to implement, and the economic integration that was supposed to bring prosperity has, in some cases, led to the further entrenchment of inequality. Feffer also discusses the EU's complicated relationship with Russia, particularly regarding energy security and geopolitical influence. Eastern European countries, especially those reliant on Russian energy exports, are caught between their desire to integrate with the EU and the pressure to maintain good relations with Russia. The EU's inability to fully address these tensions has left many countries feeling caught in the middle. Moreover, Feffer points to the rise of populist and nationalist movements in EU member states, such as Hungary, Poland, and even the Czech Republic, which challenge the EU's values of democracy, human rights, and rule of law. Leaders like Viktor Orbán in Hungary have been accused of undermining the very democratic principles that the EU champions, while still benefiting from EU membership. This chapter highlights the complexities of EU integration and the deep contradictions within the organization's approach to Eastern Europe. While the EU has undoubtedly brought significant benefits to the region, Feffer's analysis suggests that it has also contributed to a sense of frustration and betrayal in some quarters. The EU's mixed record leaves many Eastern Europeans questioning whether their dreams of prosperity and democracy are truly achievable through European integration. Chapter 8: The Nationalist Backlash. Nationalism continues to be a dominant force in Eastern Europe, and this chapter delves deeper into its resurgence. Feffer explores how the disappointment with democracy and market reforms has fed into the rise of nationalism across the region. The promises of liberal democracy, free markets, and EU membership have not been fully realized, leading many people to feel disillusioned and alienated. Feffer examines how nationalist leaders in countries like Hungary, Poland, and Serbia have exploited these feelings of frustration to consolidate power. The rhetoric of nationalism often centers around ideas of national sovereignty, traditional values, and a rejection of external influences, particularly from the EU and the United States. Feffer highlights how these leaders have framed their country's struggles as a battle for cultural and political survival in a world that they perceive as increasingly hostile to their values. In Poland, the Law and Justice Party, PiS, led by Jarosław Kaczynski, has used the narrative of a victimized Poland to fuel nationalist sentiment. The PiS has attacked the independence of the judiciary, undermined media freedom, and blamed external forces like the EU for undermining Polish sovereignty. Feffer notes that while many Poles initially embraced the promise of democracy, the PiS has exploited fears of foreign interference and a loss of national identity to justify authoritarian policies. In Hungary, Viktor Orbán's government has become a symbol of the growing authoritarian nationalism sweeping through the region. Orbán's embrace of nationalism has been accompanied by a concerted effort to dismantle democratic institutions, reduce checks on executive power, and curtail media freedoms. Feffer argues that Orbán's success in maintaining power highlights the vulnerability of democracies in Eastern Europe, where the line between democratic governance and authoritarianism can be dangerously thin. The chapter also touches on the rise of populist leaders in countries like Bulgaria, Croatia, and Romania, who similarly use nationalist rhetoric to tap into popular dissatisfaction. Feffer explains that these leaders often point to the failures of post-communist transition, rampant corruption, poor economic conditions, and perceived cultural erosion as proof that their countries are at risk of losing their national identity. The nationalist backlash, Feffer suggests, is in many ways a reaction to the trauma of the post-communist transition. As people struggle to navigate a complex and often hostile world, nationalism offers a sense of clarity, unity, and control. However, as Feffer cautions, the rise of nationalism presents a dangerous challenge to the democratic values that many hoped Eastern Europe would embrace after the fall of communism. Chapter 9. The Struggle for Identity. As Eastern European countries continue to navigate the challenges of the post-communist era, one of the most persistent themes is the struggle for national identity. Feffer explores how this quest for identity is often tied to deeply ingrained historical narratives, cultural traditions, and memories of past suffering. In the case of the Balkans, Feffer focuses on the impact of the Yugoslav Wars, which were not just territorial conflicts but also struggles over ethnic identity. The wars left deep scars in countries like Bosnia and Herzegovina, Croatia, and Serbia, where questions of identity remain highly contentious. Feffer speaks with people from these countries who are still grappling with the wounds of the past, and he examines how the desire to protect and define national identity often leads to exclusionary and divisive politics. For many Eastern Europeans, the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of communism represented an opportunity to reclaim a lost or suppressed national identity. However, as Feffer points out, this search for identity often leads to conflicting definitions of who belongs in these countries. In places like Ukraine, where the division between pro-European and pro-Russian factions runs deep, identity becomes a battleground for political power. Feffer also reflects on how the European Union's attempts to impose a uniform set of democratic and economic norms often clash with the diverse and complex identities of Eastern European nations. In some cases, the push for integration into Europe has been seen as a threat to national identity, with some countries opting to prioritize their own cultural and political distinctiveness over the ideals of EU unity. Through personal anecdotes and interviews, Feffer paints a vivid picture of how the search for identity plays out in Eastern Europe. He highlights the challenges faced by individuals caught between competing historical narratives, geopolitical pressures, and economic realities. The struggle for identity is deeply entwined with the political challenges these countries face, and Feffer suggests that understanding this struggle is key to understanding the broader political dynamics of the region. Chapter 10. The Future of Eastern Europe. In the final chapter, Feffer looks to the future of Eastern Europe, asking whether the dreams of prosperity, democracy, and integration into the West are still achievable. While the book has detailed many of the failures and frustrations of the post-communist transition, Feffer ends on a note of cautious hope. Feffer acknowledges that many of the problems facing Eastern Europe, corruption, economic inequality, nationalism, and authoritarianism, are deeply entrenched. However, he also points to some signs of resilience and progress. In countries like Slovakia and the Baltic states, there have been successful efforts to combat corruption and build more robust democratic institutions. Young people in some countries, especially those in the tech industry, are challenging old assumptions about the future and looking for new ways to engage with the world. Feffer also suggests that Eastern Europe's relationship with the European Union will continue to evolve. While some countries may turn away from the EU or embrace illiberal policies, others will continue to fight for the values of democracy and human rights. The future, Feffer suggests, will likely be marked by a continued struggle for a balance between national identity, regional cooperation, and integration into the broader European and global political spheres. Ultimately, Feffer leaves readers with the question of what it will take for Eastern Europe to fulfill its post-communist dreams. The region's trajectory is still in the making, and while the path forward is uncertain, Feffer's journey through Eastern Europe provides invaluable insights into the challenges and possibilities that lie ahead. In Aftershock, a journey into Eastern Europe's broken dreams, John Feffer takes us on an evocative and eye-opening journey through the heart of Eastern Europe, a region that, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, found itself trapped between the shadow of its communist past and the elusive promises of a democratic future. Feffer's storytelling weaves a rich tapestry of personal stories, political analysis, and historical context, offering readers an intimate look into the hopes, disillusionments, and ongoing struggles of a continent in flux. As we approach the conclusion of this gripping narrative, Feffer leaves us with a powerful reflection on the region's ongoing journey, one that is far from linear and often far from hopeful. The Eastern European dream, for many, has been marked by the collision of high expectations and harsh realities. The promises of prosperity, freedom, and integration into the Western world were too often dashed by economic instability, political corruption, and the lingering weight of past injustices. Feffer's account paints a picture not just of a region but of human lives affected by seismic shifts beyond their control. As we close the final pages of this book, Feffer's message is clear. The story of Eastern Europe is not over. While the aftershocks of communism and the disappointments of the post-Soviet era continue to reverberate, there remains an undeniable drive for change, for progress, and for connection. Eastern Europe's broken dreams may be a painful reality, but they also serve as a call to action for the future. The people of this region are not defined by their struggles, but by their relentless pursuit of a better tomorrow. In the end, Aftershock serves as both a cautionary tale and an inspiring testament to the power of human agency. It's a reminder that while the aftermath of historical upheavals can leave scars that take generations to heal, it is through the unwavering spirit of the people, those who continue to dream and to act, that we find the true strength to move forward. The story of Eastern Europe, much like the story of all human struggles, is one of perseverance, of facing the challenges of the present while never losing sight of the possibility of a better future. Feffer leaves us with the undeniable truth. The dreams may be broken, but the journey is far from over. Thanks for listening. Please like, subscribe, and click the bell icon to get new video updates. Happy learning!